Now, to start somewhere, let's talk about Jacob's ladder in relation to William Blake. Something profoundly important can be understood from this when we analyse what the symbolic and intuitive description is that DNA holds in relation to Jacob's ladder. Phosphorus or phosphate is basically the backbone for the structure of DNA because it has a phosphate backbone. We can find it in DNA, RNA, and ATP, and within ATP, which is a molecule that carries energy within cells, the phosphate bonds which connect the three phosphate groups hold high degrees of energy. Thus, ATP hydrolysis needs to occur with H2O to break a phosphate bond and release energy for the body. Now, what has this got to do with Jacob's ladder, you may ask? One could say that the philosopher's stone in alchemy is or can be comparative to phosphorus or phosphate because it basically is the backbone to all existence, the foundation to DNA, which contains our life force beyond mortal existence. It is key to cell division, DNA, energy, plant, mineral, and animal. It is the extremely important chemical compound. It is the fiat lux of our consciousness, you could say, meaning let light be made. Through this lens, we can see how the philosopher's stone, being the elixir of life, the transformative substance, can relate to the potency and importance of phosphorus, but also to Jacob's stone and Jacob's ladder. In the story of Jacob, before he falls asleep, he uses a stone as a pillow to rest his head before the dream of Jacob's ladder. Now, to remember, Freud and Jung worked on dream interpretation, which they said held the unconscious in its most performative state through dream, so that the unconscious could represent itself through dream state. Now again, another relation to inorganic phosphate. This stone could symbolically be the philosopher's stone. For one, the dream is transformative. What Jacob goes through himself later on, initiated by this transformation, for he is known as the one who wrestled with God, which psychologically is more of an internal battle with the self, for he lacked humility. For example, confronting one's own psychological problems. It is interesting in this case because in Genesis, after confronting the self with God, Jacob decides to call the name of the place in which it was done Peniel. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. This is what it says in Genesis. And this is extremely interesting because Peniel means face of God, and this to me links psychologically to the Kundalini Ajna chakra, which is in association to the pineal gland, the place of the winged seed, the third eye, and of Kundalini being the coiled snake rising up the spine in a spiral fashion, no different from the structure of Jacob's ladder presented by William Blake. So what does he do after the dream of the ladder? He sets the stone that he slept on as a pillar and pours oil onto it as a kind of offering and initiation sacrifice by saying, I quote, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, which means clothing, he calls the place of the stone Bethel, meaning God's house." So this is a symbol, I think, for transformation through psychological and alchemical sacrifice and change from what he has experienced through the dream that represents the unconscious. He has initiated the personal philosopher's stone, which also links in with the idea of reaching or going on to the path of gnosis for experience via a particular sacrifice. To refine the philosopher's stone so that one can ascend the ladder of divinity for the soul. And in a minute this will be stretched out and explained even further when we look into spiral cosmic snake symbolism, DNA and the idea of the axis mundi. So phosphorus, the reference of Jupiter's chain in Homer's Odyssey in relation to Jacob's ladder, the philosopher's stone, Kundalini, it all intuitively associates to this idea of what DNA that we know today resembles, the divine life force, but also to the most meaningful metaphysical motion that one should partake in for life, which is the upward spiral. The philosopher's stone, a symbol of psychological transmutation using fear as your best friend, so that through experience and gnosis you epigenetically overcome and initiate changes for the underlying DNA sequence. making scientifically what you could say the unconscious conscious. Thus DNA in its helical spiral form is symbolically sacred and divine because it represents the manifestation of the all-in-one, the complete consciousness, the self. And this doesn't come to us as a surprise when we look at the overhead visual perspective of DNA, being identical to the mandala, for it is a symbol of the self being full consciousness. This is one reason why Jacob's ladder is comparative to the spiral DNA, because the upward spiral is a psychological motion of spiritual movement and development, necessary through one's own will, with intent to overcome fear by constantly approaching the unknown and overcoming it. That is how you epigenetically manifest the true self or touch upon the path of individuation. It is theoretically the same process with Kundalini or the hero's journey in allegorical sense. So let's ask the question, did the ancients know about DNA before science? They didn't know about DNA from the scientific perspective as such, but I think they knew in some sense what the meaning of life and life force is, how it manifests, its metaphysic, and the fashion in which it should be confronted, which means that they had the intuitive knowledge necessary to create symbols that have ended up being comparative to the scientific structure of life force, which is DNA. And another way they presented this wisdom was through the use of the cosmic snake. The cosmic snake, or provider of attributes, was extremely significant in ancient Egypt and all around the world. Depictions of a two-headed snake or double serpent, which never existed, but to our knowledge now similar to the understanding of double-stranded DNA. We can see in this imagery that the snake heads are above the Egyptian key of life, giving more reference to what we know when it comes to DNA, for it is the provider of attributes and life. The Orphic or cosmic egg, this is a major symbol, another one, within creation myths, with the use of again the coiled helix serpent, but this time being coiled in a helical fashion around the egg. Symbolically, the egg can be seen as the merging of opposites, life force, birth of creation and cosmos, and the snake being the mysteries of its formation and time. But if seen from the understanding of DNA, it remains stunningly similar. The complementary amino acids, merging, making up the genetic code, and all of life itself is the cosmic egg of creation, and the phosphate backbone of the helical structure ascending and descending, equating to protection, mystery, and foundation is the snake. This is also similar to the artistic Hindu depiction of Sesha, Vishnu and his wife Lakshmi, resting on or within Sesha, which is the thousand-headed deity of eternity between the cycles of creation. Once again, the snake containing or acting as the foundation to all that exists, as a symbol of time. The ground for Vishnu's responsibility, as Vishnu is the second of the three Trimurti principal gods. He is there for preservation through action, with the coupling marriage of Lakshmi goddess, who resembles purity and wealth. Now the meaning of Vishnu and Lakshmi strike out to me as comparative to the roles of angels upon the axis mundi ladder, or Jacob's ladder, in the painting of William Blake, because the role of angels are to play out the role of Vishnu, which is preservation, and to personify the characteristics of Lakshmi, ascending and descending the spiral staircase of never-ending time, or beyond time, to preserve and speak the message of God. Another instance of the use of the spiral snakes are also used in this Mesopotamia seal of 2200 BC, and shows a deity in human form, enthroned. Joseph Campbell actually talks about this omnipresent snake symbolism throughout the cultures, saying, I quote, "Throughout the material, in the primitive Oriental and Occidental volumes of this work, myths and rites of the serpents frequently appear, and in a remarkable consistent symbolic sense. Whenever nature is revered as self-moving, like in a spiral fashion, and so inherently divine, the serpent is revered as symbolic of its divine life." End quote. Thus, the self-moving cycle of life explains this natural flow of upward spiral, With this, not only does it represent the flow of nature, but the functionings of history. History repeats itself, but never in the exact same fashion. People repeat themselves, but never in the exact same way. Yet, destiny calls man to live life helically, upward, facing the unknown and manifesting the unconscious, unexpressed genes that are waiting to be expressed so that one can ascend the ladder of the spiritually divine, to not rot in deja vu, maya, or stagnation of repeated pattern, where progress is never made and gnosis never realized, because that is a choice that one can live. A person is born a fool. You always start out as the fool, with whatever it is that is new to you, and that is the first principle when it comes to gnosis. And again, the spiral is comparative yet again to the premise of a labyrinth. Psychological circumambulation, as Jung puts it, is necessary to approach the goal of one's life and to attain it meaningfully, to slowly but surely reach the centre of the maze where one eventually reaches their goal and fulfills their meaning, because that would be where the axis mundi lies, the celestial pole. Thus, what we can understand is that the heart of this symbolism is one objective premise, axis mundi, that which connects the celestial poles so that any form of opposite is connected for the purpose of attaining gnosis, realised destiny or fulfilment. Whether it be Jacob's ladder, Jupiter's chain, the rod of Asclepius, the tree of life, the cosmic egg, they all feature the function of progression, the circular upward movement, the circular upward motion to preserve, protect, and hopefully to eventually manifest, because the axis mundi can also represent the goal as well, or desired potential, which gives meaning and responsibility. The reason why these symbols hold potency to a profound level is because of potentiality within the psyche or of the human soul, or individual, of man. There has never been a discovered endpoint for any kind of individuation, which is why the ladder disappears into the stars, or why DNA never has an endpoint, it being a continuous spiral formation. Even in the kundalini, the snake spirals up the spine. Again, it's the same thing. Even that has the DNA, or more specifically the phosphate backbone connotation, because the uncoiling of the snake through yoga gives enlightenment. It may be intellectual enlightenment, but it is still the light. The rod of Asclepius today is normally used as a symbol of medicine. Why? Because the premise of medicine, or used to be anyway, is to attain health, and health is an ever-developing spiralling upward evolution of knowledge, which is in constant discovery in relation to the human body and the question of how to live the best life. We don't know the ultimate answer, but it's not a finite situation with a quantitative, refined answer. That is why you have the snakes spiraling up the rod of Asclepius. The rod is the axis mundi, the centre point, the first principle or point of subject. The snakes act as the wheel for discovery, or in this case, healing around the first principle or point of subject, similar to archaeological exploration, you could say. You identify the problem or the task at hand, you then explore around that problem in an upward movement, because you don't want to repeat yourself. And because it is the first principle, you never abandon the question at heart, which is the axis mundi. You explore around it in its context, because if you don't have the context, you don't have any basis. So, for example, when looking at symbology, in a comparative way, you need to interpret symbols with first principles. So in relation to interpreting symbology with psychology, the first principle is that in your psyche, you are at war with yourself. That is the first principle of psychology. Thus the symbolism around the helix or the spiral through that first principle is also your answer, if you get what I mean. To give you an example, the Philosopher's Stone and the discovery of epigenetics in relation to DNA, expressing what you could call unconscious genes into proteins, and what will be further understood from that in later years, are both the same, but understood through different disciplines. When you use the first principle of psychology with symbolism, the philosopher's stone is the perfected and regenerated man. It is that which is transmutated to purity and has individuation, or has initiated or fulfilled individuation. And humanly, that is done by attaining gnosis through unexperienced experience. It's all fundamentally the same. The spiral is the most primordial and sacred symbol, so much so not only is it the structure of our DNA and life force, but in the past we even replicated its formation unconsciously through different disciplines of sacred wisdom due to its metaphysical truth in human motion. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, comment and subscribe. Make sure to check out my Patreon if you're interested in donating towards the channel. I've also set up a YouTube membership for people that want to contribute but don't want to use Patreon as a means of doing so. So if you go to my YouTube channel homepage, there is a button which says join and you can pick whatever tier you wish. With that said, thanks for watching. You can go to my thoughtsonthinking.org and you can sign up to the newsletter on there, which would be really helpful to build up the email list, so that would be fantastic. But thanks for watching and I wish you a lovely day. Thanks.